order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. The second work session regarding Holtan Hills AO 2022-103, competitive disposal of HLB parcels to CY Investments. It is Friday, December 2, 2022. We are scheduled from 3:50 to 4:50 p.m. today. There are a number of documents for this work session, and if you're in the room, there are some available there on the back table, and they also can be found online at muni.org/worksessions. So we'll start by having Assembly members identify themselves for the record.
Pete Peterson, Daniel Voland.
Kevin Cross.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Meg Zalato. Suzanne LaFrance. And on the phone, we have Mr. Constant.
Hello.
And Mr. Solt.
Present.
Thank you. I want to note for the record that Mr. Dunbar is excused. He has guard duty, and Ms. Allard is also excused. At the table here, we have
Adam Trombley, Mayor, Chief of Staff.
Dave Whitfield, Planning Department.
Ryan Yell, Planning Department.
Emma Gibney, Heritage Land Bank.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
and for clerk staff,
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Barbara Jones. Jennifer Starr.
thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I know many of you have traveled from Girdwood. Thank you for making the trip. And we're going to go ahead. I'm going to start with just some overview documents here that are posted online. And then we will have a presentation from the administration on an S version. And then we will have members of the Girdwood community from Girdwood Board of Supervisors and the Holtan Hills Housing Advisory Committee. Did I get that right? 3 H's? Okay. HHHAC come up and we'll have a discussion about the S version and about the project. I want to note that this item is before the Assembly at the regular meeting of Tuesday, December 6th. It is item 14E. It is a new public hearing item. And again, that will be this Tuesday. So first, I want to call attention to a timeline that has been posted on the work session webpage. It looks like we have a different, okay, I won't read through it, but to provide some context, again, this is the second work session, and we had a little bit of context provided last time. I know Ms. Quinn Davidson had some questions, and the timeline here identifies some of those dates where the project started, and there was an intent with HLB to dispose of the land to the private sector. And then further on down in 2021, there are dates regarding the RFP and just high-level information about the proposals, review committee meeting, when the appraisal was obtained, and so on. And then you can see there closer to the end, the Assembly work session number 1, and then at the end, Assembly work session number 2. Next in that document is a list of what comes next, which again, the next action is Tuesday with the Assembly to vote on an ordinance authorizing the land disposal. And then after that, conveyance of Tract 1, AWU installation of sewer, entitlements, followed by breaking ground, lot sales, new owner plan and build, and phase 2 groundbreaking, all dependent, of course, on whether or not the land disposal moves forward. Also in this document are additional steps allowing public input, and thank you to planning for assisting in helping us prepare this, and a special thanks to our legislative services staff. And this is so folks can understand what will come next in the public process, the conditional use permit, and then also entitlements and variance and so on. And then after that, several project risks are identified, and then some background documents. Also on the session webpage is let me pull it up here. Oh, you have it up already. Is a curation of the comments that Assembly members have received, primarily from members of the Girdwood community regarding the Holtan Hills project. And the intent here is to capture all the feedback. And so we can work with the administration to ensure that members of the public have responses to these questions, and also so that those of you who have submitted comments and feedback know what has been received and that it's been documented. So that's just a tool here to help us move through some of this information. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Volan.
I'm sorry, I think I might have missed it. Who prepared the document with the community comments?
This was prepared by our legislative services team. And so if there are more comments that members have received, or if members of the public look at that and see that there's some missing, we want to add those to it as well. And so that's all I have right now. So I will go ahead and turn to Mr. Trombley to talk about the substitute version, the S version, that was submitted to the addendum that will be before the Assembly on Tuesday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I would like to go through a presentation because I think there's considerable, and I appreciate everybody sending me the concerned emails that you guys have. It's been very helpful in formulating this presentation, because it seems to me that there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there. So I want to address some of the topics that I've seen come through consistently in the emails that you guys have sent me. So I'm going to end up having to get away from this microphone and probably stand up, but anyways, I'm probably not going to do that. So I'm just, they can't hear me. I feel like the guy on The Price is Right or something.
Madam Chair,
so
I
what
cannot
I think is
tell
real-
what's happening in the room.
Hold on. What was that, Mr. Constant?
I said I can't tell what's happening in the room. I heard a bunch of voices.
Okay. Well, Mr. Trombley is about to go through a presentation, and he's going to be holding a microphone, at least initially, for the presentation. So if you can't hear, thank you, Mr. Constant, please let us know.
Yeah, that's my fault, Chris. I apologize. So when we talk about Holtan Hills, the land disposal, we're talking about a very large section. The entire section is not being developed. You'll see, and you have maps in front of you, and I'll reference those later, of what the actual tracks are that we're actually discussing what actually would become housing, mixed density housing. So the red line is the larger disposal, and then the development agreement itself identifies the smaller tracks, of which will be tracks 1, 2, and 3, which we're going to actually be discussing for housing. So there's 3 guiding documents which provide us a directional path forward. Now, one of the concerns I've heard consistently is that the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan is old. It's 16 years old. It no longer has any relevance. However, I think that's a dangerous precedent to take. The Girdwood Area Plan is from 1995. And there are quite a few people who are frustrated with it because of the secondary access road. When they go to try and do a development, planning department says you need to leave right of way or some sort of access because of the secondary road. The plan's old, yes, but it's still valid. The 2020 comp plan was done in 2001. It's old, yes, but it's still a guiding document in how we function. The East Anchorage District Plan is almost 9 years old. That's old too, but my guess, Mr. Peterson, your constituents still want it to be effective. West Anchorage District Plan is almost 11 years old. It's still effective. So just because something is old doesn't necessarily mean, and it is not from a planning perspective, not a valid document. So we have the Girdwood Area Plan, the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan, and we have the Heritage Land Bank Annual Work Program, which is generally updated on an annual basis. I want to address the Girdwood Area Plan and how it looks at this Holtan Hills area. And again, you'll have another map and you'll be able to see this. The Girdwood area plan calls for single-family housing in the yellow area here, multifamily in the brown area, and single-family in this area here. Now, we disagree with that. It should be single-family and very little multifamily. And so again, we're going to address that and how we improve upon that. One of the guiding documents that I think is extremely helpful for people to understand is a Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan. Now, all of you probably know Robin Ward. You probably have a lot of respect for her. She was involved in the development of the Crow Creek Plan, and she was also involved in the development of the RFP. And I want to highlight something she said at the very bottom where it says, in talking about the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan, it offers an opportunity to alleviate the chronic shortfall of housing in the Girdwood Valley and enhance the experience of living in a mountain village. We're enthusiastic about the chance to create a project that is good for Girdwood and all of Anchorage. Now, when we talk about the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan, if you could please reference your first map that you have right here. The area that this entire plan addresses is the dotted line. It's about 1,000 acres. The area that we are talking about for Holtan Hills would be the lower matrix, the upper matrix, and a portion of the lower forest. So when we look at the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan, when it talks about plans for single family and multifamily housing, strategies so a portion is for new housing, so that the new housing is affordable, it's talking about the entire area, not just one section. And I would note that of the 1,000 acres that it talks about, Holtan Hills from an actual development standpoint represents about 6%, 60 acres of the 1,000 acres for actual development. And in all fairness, not all of the 1,000 acres is all developable. Some of it because of topography, some of it because of wetlands, some of it's not economical. The Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan went through a very robust process. You can see who approved it. The Land Use Committee, Board of Supervisors, Planning and Zoning, HLBAC, and the Acres Assembly ultimately adopted it. And everybody here knows these plans go through an extremely robust public process. And these groups all signed on to its language and how this area should develop. And again, when we go to and again, this is not the entire plan. I'm not going to go through the whole plan. I'm just highlighting important sections. The factors that shape the plan, when we look at number one, what's number one? Community desires. This is what the community desired at the time. Not to mention the HLB's mission, and it did focus heavily on market demands. And those market demands have not changed. They've gotten worse. One of the things to emphasize is, and again, when you look at your first map, it talks about moderate to high density single family housing, and I want to emphasize that moderate to higher density single family housing. We don't agree that single family housing is the only option in the area, which is why CY Investments and HLB are moving forward, and we have planning here to help describe what a PUD is, a planned unit development. What a planned unit development does, I'll get to that a little bit later. I want to address the very bottom here when it shows lower, upper, and lower forest matrix. That was identifying how many housing units they think at the time could fit into that with just single family. We believe with preliminary plats ideas, we don't have phase 3 done yet. Because again, we have phase 1 and phase 2 for the wetlands delineation. We don't have phase 3 completely done. We don't completely understand topography. So we're not exactly sure how many units we can fit in that at the time, but we're pretty confident that we can beat those total housing units for those areas.
Do you want to go ahead and take questions along the way?
It's your meeting, Madam Chair.
Go ahead,
So-
Mr. Volan.
At our previous work session, the 52 units of housing are all phase 1.
I think that's what we addressed in phase 1 at the time, yes.
Okay.
So another concern that in a lot of the emails you sent me is that this plan favors only one developer. Well, I'll turn to the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan, the approved plan, the plan the community agreed with, the assembly agreed with, is that it really sets out how should HLB develop the land. And I've highlighted number 3. It's a combination of the two, and this is the option that the RFP went with. The HLB acts jointly with a private sector developer. It doesn't say developers, it says a single private sector developer. So we are following the guidance of the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan. I want to address the concept of affordable housing because in Girdwood, validly so, 100% wants affordable housing. I have yet, HUD, you know this better than I do, Ms. Zalatel, is HUD has a very clear definition of what affordable housing is. But I think everybody here on this body understands that what's affordable in your district is not necessarily affordable in other districts. What's affordable in Fairview, Mountain View is not the same as what's affordable in Girdwood, right? Which is why the plan says that Girdwood is responsible for developing their own approach to affordable housing. They need to define affordable housing for their area, and they are responsible. The language is there. They are responsible for developing their own. Now, for whatever reason, and I will say on the next page, it addresses a roadmap. It doesn't just say you're responsible, but it provides a roadmap, and it provides examples of how Girdwood can do it. Now, I don't know why. I haven't been involved for 16 years as to why it was never done. But in the S version that you're going to see, in the S version that's in front of you, what we have done is CY Investments of HLB have agreed to help spur Girdwood in creating their own housing authority, and whatever that looks like. Within Holtan Hills in phase 1, we are going to give them this entity, whatever that entity looks like. I don't know what the entity is. I am not a housing authority expert, but it gives them 5 years to develop their own housing authority. At which point they will then receive that land and they can develop it how they want to provide what they see as their definition of affordable housing. They can get the funding, they can do everything. They can meet the Crow Creek Neighborhood Plan. We're offering HLB, what's that?
I'm sorry. Are there paper copies of this presentation anywhere, or is it just electronic? Because it's
At this time it is. I did send it to Ms. Ross, but I did not ask her to print it
okay.
out.
Is
so we
it
can
on
print
the
it out.
work? That would be really helpful because it's a lot of information, and I'd like to be able to take notes on the presentation as we go. Thanks.
Sure. So again, we're offering that up, and we're giving them 5 years to develop that. I'm not stuck on 5 years. That was just kind of what we came up with. If they want longer, we're happy to accommodate that as well.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Quinn
Just a
Davidson.
quick one, not to derail us, and
Sure.
I can't imagine that we'll finish this in an hour anyway, but it says one multifamily lot. How big is that? Like, what the idea is that this authority could be formed and work to place whatever their definition of affordable housing is, but how big is it? How many units potentially could go there?
So the lot that we are offering, HLB and CY Investments is offering, is one where the multiplex could go. Currently, right now, we're looking at an 8-plex, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. But I think the goal here is that once they have an operational housing authority, I believe HLB has roughly around 5,000 acres of land in Girdwood. So it's possible that, I mean, this isn't a one-off. This is like, hey, you have your entity started. Now, how else can you branch out to provide whatever they define as affordable housing?
So is the lot more to place a physical authority, or is it to develop?
It's,
with
yeah,
them?
I'm sorry. I may haven't been clear, Ms. Quinn Davison. Yes, it would be something that they would be given, at which point they could then develop. Once their
Mhm.
housing authority is active, they could develop it, they could fund it, they can do whatever a housing authority does, which I am no expert on housing
And
authorities.
how big is it?
That lot could accommodate an 8-plex or possibly greater.
Okay. So is that like a half acre or something? I don't know what.
I apologize, Ms. Quinn Davison. I don't have the exact square
Okay,
footage
and
of
that's
the
okay,
lot.
but okay,
Sure.
thank you,
Mhm.
Mr. Trombley.
This is Christopher, if I might.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
So what I just heard was a suggestion of the creation of a housing authority for Girdwood and the date of 5,000 acres. I just want to be really clear that this is the municipality's land, and any transfer of massive acres like that would have a vast array of public process.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. So I'm very uncomfortable with the language housing authority, especially when you put a governmental name, like a town's name, Girdwood Housing Authority, in front of it, because it sounds like a public housing authority. I would recommend maybe Girdwood Housing Trust. So it's not like we're not asking Girdwood to go through the process of creating a municipal entity unless that's the intent. And I think it's really important to make that distinguish that up front, because the two are extremely different things.
Sure. Through the chair, Ms. Zalatel, I'm no housing authority. I'm just going by the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan, where we see like Whistler Housing Authority and Teton County Housing Authority. I don't know the differentiation between the two. I'm open to whatever Girdwood wants to create, whether it's a private sector, nonprofit, help with some sort of government agency. I don't really know. But all I'm saying is that we're offering that up so that they can meet the goals that they agree to. Whatever that looks like, it's irrelevant to me.
It's not irrelevant, though, and I think this is really important. So I'm going to take a little umbrage at the comments, because what we've heard is, and one of the things you're saying is, one of the issues at hand is they want to be able to develop some land themselves to create affordable housing. And a public housing authority is a very complicated, significant thing. Anchorage doesn't have a public housing authority. We rely on Alaska Housing and Finance Corporation to be the public housing authority. So it's not trivial, because the mechanism we indicate, if we were to pass this S version, is going to give Girdwood direction to meet their need and their to remedy their identified concern. So I think it is important, and I think we should probably spend some time, maybe me and you offline with legal, and figure out what the right language is there to give them the maximum flexibility, which is what I hear you saying you want to do. But I think it's important that we figure that out, because it'll be a key to the community deciding whether or not that's sufficient to address their concern as well. And it's Friday, and we're going to take this up on Tuesday.
Yeah, I understand, Ms. Through the chair, I understand, Ms. Zalatel. Again, I'm just looking at the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan and the examples that are provided in there. So I want to emphasize a little bit about the Teton County Housing Authority, and I think this is very close to.
Sorry, Mr. Trombley. Mr. Cross had asked to get in the queue. And
Just real quick, and I want to stay on it. You say it's for a phase of 5 years. I remember under HLB Title 25, isn't it typically 3 years that an HLB transfer takes place if they transfer it from municipality to another department? Isn't it normally 36 months in order to come up with a plan or some sort of, and if they don't complete something, it reverts back? I mean, I'm just saying that this is longer than what is actually in code as far as to develop either an authority or develop a plan for the use of HLB property. And I think that's an important aspect. So you're giving more than what is actually provided in code. Thank you.
Let me double check, but I'm pretty sure it's flexible. I don't think there's a single unit. I think I remember in other documents where we've negotiated that.
So again, the Teton County Housing Authority in Wyoming, they responded due to the housing crisis they had. Clearly, folks who earned even a moderate income could not afford to live where they worked. And we hear that consistently from Girdwood. I've seen that in the emails, and I've heard that from them, that we cannot live where we work. And so this was Teton County's reaction to that. There's also been a considerable amount of concern about the effects on the public infrastructure. So when we sent this out for agency review, the Anchorage School District, Anchorage Wastewater Utility, both said that the development of Holtan Hills would not negatively impact the current infrastructure that's there. The other aspect of the Crow Creek plan was that when they said volume traffic is well within the carrying capacity of an improved 2-lane Crow Creek Road, that was also assuming that the entire 1,000 acres would be developed according to the plan. We're not talking about developing the entire 1,000 acres. At this point, we're talking about just this one section. So we don't feel as though the infrastructure is going to be impacted, especially when the subject matter experts from AWU, Anchorage School District, say that is adequate. On another positive, oh, sure.
So I have Ms. Quinn Davidson and then Mr. Constant.
Thank you, birthday lady. I hear it's Miss LaFrance's birthday. What a way to spend your birthday. All day meetings.
Finally legal to drink.
So one of the complaints that I heard, and I made a list of them trying to summarize some of the community concerns, was that this road would be maybe built by the developer, but then the maintenance would fall on the shoulders of the residents. But if the folks who own those homes are also paying in for road maintenance, wouldn't that be the case? I guess if this is the right time to clear that up, that would be helpful. If it's not, we can talk about it later.
No, I'm absolutely, through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, I'm absolutely happy to do that. I do reference that in another slide, but we can address it now, of course. When people pay property taxes, a portion of that goes to road service. In this case, the Girdwood has their own service area. So homes that would be there would pay property taxes into the service area for maintenance on the road. Just like, say, West Park subdivision. The developer builds the road, the maintenance is taken over by the municipality. The road has to be built according to mass standards, the standards and specifics of the municipality. And then the homeowners through their property taxes pay into the service area, whichever one that is. And then the municipality or the service area comes through and maintains that. So there'd be nothing for free. Does that answer your question, Ms. Quinn Davidson? Sure.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. I think that in this area, we tap into one of the core conflicts between the messages of the people opposing the project. And I don't know how we square this, but on one hand, they say they want more density, more housing units, more people to be able to be served than what is already in place in the plan. And on the other hand, they argue, we don't want this on our roads because it's going to tax our roads and make them harder to maintain. And I don't know how to square the impulse between, or the difference between those two impulses, right? We want more people. We want to not have impacts on our infrastructure. And so for my part, I always weigh the question that we've spent the last 5 years talking about: how do we get more housing? And I think for me, the default is more housing, which means use of our infrastructure. And that means the people who are their property owners have to pay. So I'm struggling with this argument.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Sure. One of the things about these plans is they always post some of the comments, which I think is interesting. We had support. People talked about, I don't know what a 10,000 square foot lot in Girdwood would go for now, but I'm sure it's considerably more than $100,000. We had some people saying that we don't want high density and government shouldn't be doing affordable housing. So we kind of had it all over. We see the same concern in 2006, overloading the school, making roads congested. And my favorite quote of all is that people have babies and places grow. So you kind of run the gamut of concerns and support, which are consistent with what we hear today. In regards to the Heritage Land Bank annual work program, I just wanted to highlight that in the work program for quite a while, these locations that we're looking at for disposal have been identified for residential development. And I think you don't have this one in there. And again, this is just an easier map to understand which areas will actually be affected. So again, the whole thing will be disposed of. These 3 phases go to the developer, and the remaining amount comes back into HLB's inventory. So not all of the acreage goes to private developer, most of it, a majority of it comes back. If you could look at your next page, and this one is really telling, and this is where I want to get into just a little bit about the PUD. So again, you can see that the underlying zoning only allows for single family homes and just a small sliver of multifamily. What we want to do, HLB and CY Investments wants to do, is want to create a planned unit development. And what that does is think of it as an opportunity to overlay on top of the underlying zoning, and it allows you to maximize density. That's the reason for a PUD. A PUD allows you to maximize density and go as dense as you can possibly go without having to follow the underlying zoning. We did that because we want density. We want to fit as many units in there as possible. Mixed density provides mixed housing options, which provides mixed price points. The other aspect about a PUD is that it locks in the builders to meet that demand. So when it requires a certain density, the builder can't come in with a lot that's supposed to have an 8-plex on it and say, I'm going to build a 10,000 square foot single family home. The PUD prevents that from happening, so it locks in the density. The other concern that I heard consistently was concerns about wetlands. Validly so, wetlands are extremely important. And you can see how the design tries to avoid as many wetlands as possible. The other thing about the PUD is that we are able to utilize wetlands as the open space, correct? As a portion of the open space. So we're looking as much as possible to avoid ever even touching wetlands.
Go ahead, Ms. Alatel.
Thank you. So I'm trying to take your presentation along with the S version, just kind of at the same time. So in the S version, it says we'll restrict the use of single family properties. What's the intersection of a single family designation and a PUD? Because is a PUD, I don't understand the intersection of those two things. Do single family homes exist within a planned unit development? And so then there could be multiple single family parcels within an overall PUD, planned unit development, and then there could also be multifamily parcels within the planned unit development.
That's correct. You can have completely mixed densities. You can have single family, duplex, fourplex, multiplex, triplex. It allows you to an entire, unlike the underlying zoning that you saw where it says we're zoned for only single family, this allows you to do a mixture of all.
Great. So then turning back to the S version, where it says we'll restrict the use of single family properties for short-term rentals, why only the single family portion and not the whole variety of properties that could exist in a PUD?
Sure. Well, I think everything's on the table. We left that out there to see the reaction, and we're happy to continue that conversation.
And maybe I'm missing a piece of information here. The unit makeup of the PUD doesn't exist yet, correct? That's further down the road.
Yes, that's correct. Through the chairman, that's correct. PUD requires a conditional use permit, so ultimately it ends up at planning and zoning.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trombley.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Quick question before we run. Do we have PUDs that you know of that you can share, for examples?
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
This is Connie Yoshimura, and I would like to answer that question if I may. There are two very
And Ms.
successful
Yoshimura,
plans
could you speak up just a little? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Sure. I would just like to identify two very successful planned unit developments. One is the Southport, that's developed by Carr-Gottstein Properties, that has condominiums, luxury, single-family home, and mixed density. And the other one is Independence Park, that was developed in the 1980s, which has stacked condominiums, small lot, single-family, duplexes, and townhouses as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And then,
Yeah, there's a third
ahead,
on
Mr.
Aurora
Cross.
Loop off of Boniface and Fourth, which is a PUD. That's Aurora Loop. They all look like duplexes, but that was a PUD as well in order to get increased density into that area. So we have several of them around. Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I also have a question sort of piggybacking on what Ms. Salatel asked about section 1B of the S version, which refers just to single family homes. So I would say we received a lot of feedback from folks in the community, and probably the primary concern, in my opinion, I didn't count, but just sort of anecdotally, was that this would not necessarily provide the affordable housing, whatever that definition is, that the community is in need of. And so I had just emailed Adam today saying, oh, I'd like to bring an amendment that would add a requirement that that these not be used as short-term rentals, sort of to alleviate some of that concern. And it was already in the S version. But so my question is really similar to Meg, which is why would it only be single family? And I hear what you're saying, Adam, which is it could be anything we want it to be. But can you break down for me what are the different types beyond single family in the PUD? Or what could they be? And what do we know based on the rough plans we now have what the single family percentage would be? Like how much of the development do you think that would be?
Well, through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davison. So everything we have right now is conceptual, right? Because it's there is a challenge with if we don't get the land disposal, then it's challenging to spend a tremendous amount of money up front, because if the land disposal doesn't happen, then we don't go through the PUD process and we don't go through the platting process without that. I can say that it's more multifamily in the preliminary plats that we do have. It's greater density than it is single family homes. I don't have the breakdown for you off the top of my head as far as single family duplex. I know that we have 8 tracts identified for 3 8-plexes, along with duplexes and 4-plexes. I don't know the exact breakdown, and there are single family homes with options for ADUs to increase density as well. So it's very challenging to tell you an exact plat, because in order to do the plat, it needs to be a part of the PUD, but you can't do the real work on the PUD until you get the land disposal. And the PUD process will be a public process.
So may I follow up, Madam Chair? So would this addition of, I guess it's not a special limitation, as Dean told me, it's a condition, I guess, that, so we would say as the assembly, as P&Z or the planning board is evaluating next steps, they would need to ensure that this was included. Is that the direction we're giving through this? Okay. And I guess I would like to know I would like to know sort of a rough estimate before Tuesday, I guess, of how much do we think, even just with the rough plans, single family homes are, and what the other options could be. Because for me, I think, okay, that's a great start. But if the community is really worried about affordable housing, and condos are cheaper for folks, who might want to buy a second home, and then they're just going to turn those into Airbnbs, but actually condos are maybe more affordable for folks who are working in the service industry and other, those were the concerns that I heard from the community. So I'm not sure that just limiting it to single family homes really solves that problem, or maybe doesn't solve it entirely. So I would be interested in broadening that, but I don't want to just say everything and make a mess. So I guess I rely on you guys to think about what our options are that are reasonable options that sort of capture that intent, if you would be willing.
I've got 2 other members in the queue, and I just want to be mindful of time because it's about 4:30. I'm hoping that folks can stay a little bit longer, and because we want to make sure we have enough time to hear from the community and get feedback about the S version and any concerns, but also want to make sure members have enough time to get clarity about the S version. So next is Mr. Constant, then Ms. Zalatel.
Thanks. I think maybe we have a linguistic issue going on here. That when we talk about single family in the context of the planned unit development as it's been presented here, and I haven't talked with anybody about this project in a planned unit development before, so express to me what I'm thinking, what they're talking about, and maybe you can clarify for me, Adam, is that you're talking about single family in the sense of a condo, several condos in a building, but each independently owned. It could be a duplex, but each side independently owned, as opposed to having larger buildings with a single owner who is renting out units to individuals, which promotes home ownership, which is the thing that actually provides the stability in people's lives, is the actual ownership part. Am I reading that right, or am I getting this wrong?
Through the chair, so the planning department would define it based upon the number of structures on the lot, but primarily how many dwelling units are present on each lot. So if you've got more than 2 dwelling units on a lot, it's going to fall under multifamily. If it's 2 dwelling units per lot, it's going to be 2 family. And we would define single family as 1 principal structure, 1 primary dwelling unit on that lot.
Right, but Ryan, I think that is where the linguistic issue is coming into play, because I think we've already talked about a number of buildings that have a higher density function on them, but they're still talking about them as individually owned, which is kind of this may be a difference in language between the planning department's definition of single family and the developer's definition. I'm not sure, but I think we have a difference of language going on here.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ryan was nodding his head. Ms. Zelatel?
Thank you. I want to state this question, but it may need to be taken offline. How do we make sure the restriction in B would stick with the property if CY Investments decides to dispose and can't, if we were to dispose this from HLB to CY Investments and they are unable to make this move forward in phase 1, how would we ensure that this restriction still existed if it moved forward, or does it go back to HLB at that point? It goes back to HLB. Okay. That answered my question. That was my concern.
Thank you, Ms. Zelatel.
Sure. Back to the presentation. I'll try to speed up. Some of the other concerns that we heard was that, this is public use land, that we can't do development on it, but AMC 25, Title 25 allows us to sell and dispose of land for specific projects. So we do have the code ability to do that. I do have somebody here, Mark Schimsheimer, who is actually on the RFP panel in helping develop the RFP and actually reviewing all the RFPs. He's here to answer any questions if anyone has any process associated with the RFP. But you can see the criteria that was involved for evaluating the proposals, and then the requirements. And again, we talk about the public benefit. I'm not going to read that for you. You can read it, but the public benefit of disposing of the land. This is one of the pages from CY Investments proposals, and you can see in this page, it's referenced multiple times that this provides opportunities for nonprofits to provide affordable housing. It provides mixed housing types, which is exactly what this does. There's nothing in this land disposal. There's nothing in the development agreement that would stop I always use cook inlet housing because I don't know a lot of others, but a cook inlet housing from coming in and purchasing lots and building some form of affordable housing. There's nothing that stops that. This provides an opportunity for a nonprofit to come in and actually provide affordable housing if they want to come in and purchase lots. Some aspects of the development agreement, because I know there's been a lot of concerns. These are some of the highlights that I wanted to mention, what the development agreement does. It discusses what happens if the developer fails on their conditions. It talks about who's responsible for what cost. Concerns about the Crow Creek Road, for example, the development agreement sets aside and says that CY Investments will set aside, I can't remember, I think it's $120,000 or $150,000 in trust or escrow for the initial cost of the secondary access. There's concern that the secondary access will never happen. So there's guarantees for the secondary access. And again, it identifies that the compensation between CY Investments and Heritage Land Bank are 50-50. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ryan to describe the PUD process and to answer any questions associated with it.
Yes, thank you. So the conditional use permit for a residential plan unit development is a tool that exists within Anchorage Municipal Code Title 21. And what it allows a developer to do is to go in and they're afforded some flexibility when it comes to dimensional standards and density. But the key point here also is that it's more restrictive in the fact that they have to provide open space for residents. So dedicated tracts of open space. So even though you're offering more density, it's more compact in terms of lot orientation and design. So therefore, when we think of instead of 50 single family homes, we're going to have 250 multifamily. And again, I'm just throwing those numbers out there for an example. That's not specific to this concept plan. But it doesn't mean that the entire acreage is going to be consumed by residential development. There will be open space tracts set aside. The conditional use permit is decided upon by the Planning and Zoning Commission through a public hearing.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Okay, and if other members have questions, I don't want to hog. I just have a list. So I made a list of concerns, and a couple folks said that the cheapest condo through this development they thought would be around 500,000, and that the average home would be around 1 million. I don't know how people would know that because we don't even know what the development looks like yet. Do you have any sense for those numbers or what meaning there is to them?
Through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davison, I know where the $500,000 number came from. I think Ms. Yoshimura mentioned that at a public meeting. I don't know where the $1 million home comes from, but again, we really don't know. We do know that the cost of getting the land developed could be upwards of around $200,000, just the land, just to get it ready to be built on.
Okay.
So then you can probably extrapolate how much it actually costs, labor, materials, those kind of things for homes.
Got it. Just interrupt me, everyone, when you want to go. I just have a couple more, but someone claimed that 95% of Girdwood residents voted to stop Holtan Hills. Where would there have been a vote on this?
Through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davison, that would be a question for Girdwood. I was not aware of a public vote that occurred, but not to say that it didn't happen.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of it either. Is any of my colleagues aware of that? Okay. Can you speak about the RFP process? I think we got a number of comments about it being, okay. Hi, Mark. Well, here,
Come on
I'll
up,
finish.
Mark.
Yeah.
We'll make sure you have a microphone.
So some folks felt that it happened too quickly, or it was rushed, or the RFP was issued too quickly after the HLB work program was completed. Can you just speak to sort of what's typical and whether this was part of the typical process or not, or consistent with the typical process?
I was a part of the RFP review committee, and as such, I was privy to some of the creation of the RFP, obviously the committee, and I believe were others on the committee that are here in the room, or is it just me? Okay. To the best of my understanding, this process followed municipal code, which is a standard practice for an RFP. I believe all time commitments that were required were met. That was what we reviewed in the process. We received 2 responsible and quality proposals, which is not uncommon for activities like this. Sometimes you can get 10 proposals, but 2 is not an unreasonable number. We did our diligence per what you've seen as the criteria. I do recall the meeting quite distinctly. We had a very robust conversation. This happened under the previous administration, but we came up with a consensus view, made a selection, and upon that selection, HLB procurement awarded the contract. So I see nothing out of the ordinary with the process that we went through.
That's really helpful. And I just have one final question, if that's okay. One person who wrote in said that the RFP specifically asked for a proposal that would include senior housing. Can you speak to that? I'd only heard that in one of the comments, but
I don't recall. I'd have to review the proposal, and I haven't looked at it. That would be a question probably for HLB to answer.
okay, you don't have to answer it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And just to our legislative services team, we want to make sure too, we capture any additional community questions, or I think you have some of those on the list already. Thanks. Next is Ms. Zelatel.
Thank you. So something that springs to mind here, and it's not necessarily with regard to this land disposal, but I think it's important. We're talking about affordability in Girdwood. What tools does the municipality have to lower the cost of housing in Girdwood? We have like downtown tax incentives that have never left downtown for some reason. We have some other development incentives within the bowl, but do any of them apply to Girdwood, or should we be, there isn't a reason we couldn't look at policy changes concurrent with this disposal. I think this is bringing to light a number of issues beyond just short-term rentals. We have some tools we've tried out. So do we have any that apply to Girdwood? And if not, then I think we need to take a long, hard look at those. Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair, Ms. Zolatel, I don't know if there's anything specific like tax abatement wise, like deteriorated properties, economic zones, those kind of things. But I do know that whatever we do has to follow state statute and has to qualify underneath state statute. So does deteriorated property work for Girdwood? Possibly, possibly not. I don't know, but I agree with you. That's something that should be looked at to see how we can help that tax abatement process to help make projects pencil.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Thank you, Mr. Trombley. So I will go to Mr. Constant, and then I'm hoping, and then I just have a quick question, and then I'm hoping we can hear from members of the community and that you all will stick around. If we can squeeze everyone around the table, that'd be great. But hopefully we can do that soon. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I think I can remember back to 2020, 2021, even maybe 2019 discussions about promoting housing in Girdwood. And I am wondering if anybody knows the history of efforts to make development of these lands out there. Like, have we been here before? Is this the first time we've been here? What's the history? Does anybody know?
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, in regards to Holtan Hills, the only history that I know of is that at one point in time, there was a development that was approved through P&Z. It was nothing but a single family home development in that location, but for whatever reason, it never went forward. Why it didn't, I've never gotten a clear answer as to why it didn't go forward.
So I have a sense that we've been here before, probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 times. And that the same issues come up every time. You know, you have a plan and a project gets proposed, and then a group of people oppose it, and then it falls apart because there's no financial feasibility. And the developer kind of comes around and says, I'm not doing this anymore because the trade winds are against me. And so I am excited about this project, and I am looking forward to hearing more from the community, but I would like to see a bit of a history written up on efforts to get housing out in Girdwood. That might be instructive for tactics for the future.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, I think one of the reasons why this project can be and will be successful is because of the partnership with HLB. You're looking at sharing offsite costs, for example. A lot of times housing developments don't work because of the offsite cost requirements put on developers that ultimately get shifted onto the consumers, and it makes those lots specifically outside the market. So because we are doing a 50-50 profit share split and HLB is covering that offsite cost, well, actually, technically it'd be a grant, an earmark for the federal through Lisa Murkowski's office to help bring those offsites on. I think that's what makes this project more economical and more likely to succeed.
So that grant you're talking about is in hand or close enough to in hand that it's fungible?
As AWU has said through the chair, Mr. Constant, as AWU has said, 95% sure.
Thank you.
I think I read about it. Thank you.
Mr. Gates?
Yes, I was just going to mention, relevant to the question about some tax incentives for the housing. In the development agreement in section 4.6 had a statement the developer intends to pursue some tax incentives under section of our code 1215 something. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that we're aware of that. 1215 or 15E6 of our code.
Thank you, Mr.
which
Gates.
is- yeah.
Thank you. And just a question to planning that came up from the community about the master plan. Can you talk about a requirement for a master plan? That's an area of concern for members of the community. They haven't seen it or reviewed it and are wondering how planning can happen for like the school district, AWU, and so on.
So through the chair, the development master plan is a requirement for any development occurring within the GR3 district. And GR3 is one of the zoning districts within the petition site. The Crow Creek neighborhood plan is serving as that development master plan. Even though the Crow Creek neighborhood plan was developed in 2006, it was effectuated within that 7-year time limit as established per code, and is still an adopted plan that is effective.
Thank you. Okay, so one final comment from Mr. Cross, and then we'll switch it out here. Go ahead, Mr. Cross. Or-
Just real fast, one of the public concerns was actually that extension of Hightower Drive, and going and creating access up through Holtan Hills. And that they saw that as a big contribution from the municipality, an unusual request, and that was showing some favoritism towards the contractor. And I'm just looking for some verification. I also heard that was actually road and the expansion was supposed to be done by the ASD, but wasn't done. And so we're basically left holding the bill for a road development project that was supposed to be done by another entity, wasn't completed. And so can you speak to if that's accurate or if that's just conjecture?
Sure. Through the chair, Mr. Gross, what I can tell you is that access through Hightower is necessary because AWU needs to take the sewer line and from Hightower to the property line at Holtan Hills. So that will happen, and that's where the access has to happen. But the reason that has to happen is because when the school was built, we have a requirement that you usually bring utilities to the end of the property line on the other side so that when you develop on the other side, you have a connection there. The school district was either exempted from that requirement or didn't do it. So if they had done that, we wouldn't have had to put in that the utilities there.
So part of that extra burden cost that you're trying to prevent from falling on the developer was a failure of the school district at time of construction to meet what is their standard requirement of bringing utilities in. I think that's an important point. This isn't a give me. This is protocol wasn't followed. There's an unreasonable cost being here, and we're trying to help compensate for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. And I believe too, you have a document later, right, that you'll speak to?
It can either wait till Tuesday or it's just a quick statement. I want to respect everybody else's time. It's not critical. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cross. All right, and if, I don't know, Mr. Trombley, if you want to sit over here or if any of you want to stay up here to be able to answer any questions of Mr. Edgington and Mr. Daniels and.
Are you actually going to answer questions?
Or-
I can actually go and sit down.
Okay.
Oh, it's like I'm back on the assembly.
It just got really quiet.
People are just sitting down. You're not missing anything.
And so
Okay, thanks.
we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Edgington. And then if each of you who are here from Girdwood would introduce yourselves. And then if you want to share concerns or any feedback, and we'll go from there. Welcome.
Okay, what if you can hear me? What I'll do first is I think we should introduce each other, and then I'll start. So my name is Mike Edgington. I'm co-chair of Girdwood Board of Supervisors and Land Use Supervisor.
This is Jen, and she is also a Girdwood Board of Supervisors representative. Sorry. This is Jen. She's also a Girdwood Board of Supervisors representative. However, she's suffering from a cold and she can't speak. So she has something written here that she has asked me to speak to on her behalf. My name is Lene Dorn. I'm a Girdwood resident.
Madam Chair, members of the Assembly and public, my name is Sam Daniel, and I am the co-chair of the Holtan Hills Advisory Committee. I am also a 30-year past resident of Girdwood, although I live in Anchorage now, and I have practiced real estate as a licensed broker in Girdwood for the past 26 years.
Okay, thank you. So I had a few comments I wanted to make first, and then actually I have some comments that respond to other things that have other questions that have come from Assembly members and responses to the S version.
And Mike, I just want to do a sound check.
Yes, sure.
Chris and those on the phone, can you hear okay?
I can speak louder.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great.
Loud and clear.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I'm aware we're already an hour into an hour meeting. So addressing some of the things I've heard from the broader sort of Anchorage community, friends elsewhere, one of the questions I've heard is why is there so much passion from the Girdwood community about this particular project? And I think it's, where Girdwood is kind of almost at this existential inflection point at the moment. There's this question about whether the community should really, whether the community can stay as a community or whether it just becomes effectively a resort playground. And what we're seeing as members of the community is kind of a hollowing out of, other residents. There are a lot of people who have been forced out of the community. If they don't already have stable housing, it's pretty much impossible to get to that point. So we've seen an emptying out of the community, and that's very threatening. It feels like a very different place and is becoming a very different place to how it's been before. I've also heard a number of arguments of why this disposal is a good idea as it is. One of those that I hear frequently is just adding more homes solves our housing problem. And that just isn't true in resort communities. And I can provide plenty of examples from other communities where it's proved not to be true. One example is Whitefish in Montana. They actually were ahead of the curve. They did a housing action plan about 5 years ago, and they estimated they needed 960 homes or 960 housing units to address the issues of housing in that community. Over those 5 years, they've actually built about 1,100 homes. Unfortunately, nearly all of those are very high cost single family homes that are primarily being used by people who are as vacation homes or in some cases short-term rentals. And it has made virtually no dent on the affordability for people who live in the community and work in the community. So simply more homes is not an answer in resort communities. It may be elsewhere, does not work in Girdwood. I've also heard that the opposition coming from Girdwood is just NIMBYism. And I think I heard that a little bit in some of the echoes of the earlier comments from some Assembly members. And I would say, again, that is not the case. I'm sure there are people within the community who just don't want development. But in most cases, I think the majority of people do want development. They just want a development that actually solves the pressing issues we have today. And this development, while I suppose there are ways in which it could do, there's no guarantee whatsoever that it would do. In fact, not even, I would say, a likelihood that it would do so. The other thing I've heard, and this was touched again in the presentation earlier, is that the community concerns we have about how the housing is going to be used, density and issues like this, can be solved during the planning process. In a very narrow sense, yes. I mean, the planning process, when it goes in front of P&Z, et cetera, is really a kind of technocratic process. Does it meet code? Does it follow the procedures? And the question we're really trying to get the Assembly to deal with is much more of a political question. It's really, what is the purpose of this development? Is the purpose of this development to address the housing needs of the Girdwood community? Or is the purpose of this development to basically treat it as if it was a purely private development and to maximize profit or maximize return for HLB? The way other communities, other resort communities facing these problems have solved things is by putting some requirements, restrictions, or incentives around private development, but focusing their effort on public-private development. When public land is being used, the primary purpose, or at least a substantial purpose of that development, is to help the needs of the community. Private development is a little bit different, but this is, whether HLB is truly, it's in this weird space of being an enterprise, but it is still using public land. It should maximize public benefit, which I would argue has got to include the benefit to the community itself. The final point, which was touched on again with some of Mr. Tremblay's comments, is that Girdwood needs to solve this. We're trying. I mean, there will be hopefully a proposal in front of you in the next few weeks that tries to at least start approaching some of these issues. The problem is that Girdwood is not a city. We don't have our own powers. We can't address policies. We don't have any legislative power. We rely on the assembly to do that for us, and we rely on the limited powers we have within our service area to do some of that for us. But the service area is primarily, or most of our function is advisory to the assembly and to the other parts of the administration. So while Girdwood needs to solve this problem, that under our current structure means the assembly and the Anchorage administration need to solve that problem. We are not a completely separate entity in that way. So there are still, I would say, given both the S version and the ordinance itself, there are still kind of 4 things that I think would need to be resolved. One of those is really the key one is this is meant to be a housing development. There's nothing in the development agreement that guarantees a single house or a single housing unit. This development is all about land development, and then third parties will actually address the housing. Now, while the PUD puts some limitations on what type of housing will be developed, it doesn't say anything about use. It's just type of housing. And again, we haven't seen it, so we don't know what will actually happen. And I don't believe there's any requirements on timing or in fact to build anything at all, as far as I'm aware. So one of my concerns is you have a proposal in front of you that disposes of public land and has no guarantees that any housing of any type is built at all. It would be good to see some kind of, reversionary clause or something similar, which again, most municipalities, I would say, would do in order to achieve the primary goals of this development. Second thing is, I think that one of the things we would need as a community is a mixture of housing. I think the presentation earlier actually described very well how this could achieve the mixture of housing. The third thing is, I will call it community housing. So that is housing for people in the community, either in the future or currently, or people who work in the community. And again, I think the big difference between the rest of Anchorage and many communities and Girdwood, similar to other resort communities, is that the primary driver of sales, as I'm sure Sam could talk to, and development is people building vacation homes, second homes, or vacation rentals in some cases. So it's what we often call empty homes or dark homes. They are not homes which are lived in as a primary residence. And again, there is nothing in this proposal that deals with that in any sense. And the fourth one is affordability. And again, I think it was touched on a little bit earlier. Yes, this land could be used to build affordable housing, but the same is true of any private tract today. And we have not seen nonprofits rushing to do that. In fact, my understanding in discussions with Siri is Girdwood is not a community they believe they can work in. But obviously Cook Inlet, Cook Inlet cannot work in. They can obviously answer that in more detail. That's my understanding. So I think you have kind of a couple of options when it comes to your actions on Tuesday. I mean, one is just to reject and say no. The other is kind of to hopefully force a sort of more meaningful conversation between the community and HLB, and through HLB, the developer, to address some of these concerns that I think still hit in the S version. Finally, some specific comments on the S version. Again, I appreciate some of the changes in there. It still does not hit the key issues. This development has nothing in it that will likely produce a majority of community housing as opposed to vacation second homes. I also have very similar concerns to Zalatel about the term housing authority, and we can talk about that in more detail later if you wish. And just a very small point is I think there's one thing in the language that talks about working with Triple HAC, which is a committee of GBOS. GBOS is the government entity, so it just makes more sense to address GBOS directly. I have some particular responses to questions that have come up. What I'd like to do is pass it on to Jennifer, and then maybe I can come back and address specific questions. Thank you.
Okay, the document has been edited while while sitting here, so if I don't read it smoothly, my apologies, but I will do my best. At this point, every person here has heard a lot about Holtan Hills development. Much of the attention thus far has been on the absence of affordable workforce housing in the development, and yet this project still exacerbates the strains on Girdwood's economy, infrastructure, and housing crisis, doing more harm than good, largely because of the broken public process that engendered it in the first place. Just today, we've heard that the Crow Creek Neighborhood Plan should not be considered invalid despite its age. But it's not just old. It was created in 2006, 2 years before Airbnb was even founded and long before the revolution in our housing market that is created. In your last work session, you heard about the unanimous RFP award, but there was no mention of the fact that it was awarded to a consortium that no longer exists. The novel alliance between HLB and CY Investments was not voted on at all, nor was the seemingly overnight transformation of HLB into a developer and land speculator entertaining into a contract without any oversight that is now being called unalterable. All to respond to an RFP that wasn't included in the work plan this assembly had only recently approved. Nor was there mention that the RFP awarded explicitly says repeatedly that they will be providing opportunities for the creation of affordable housing and workforce housing, including seasonal workforce apartments. Girdwood is asking that the developer and HLB be held to those promises. This assembly also heard about the 70-some hours of meetings for the development team, but not of the thousands of hours Girdwood has put in. You were told that one meeting last June satisfied the requirements of public involvement from Title 21, which is troubling enough, but you were not told that over 140 Girdwoodians attended that meeting, almost all vehemently opposed to the project, or that shortly thereafter, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors issued a letter officially opposing the project. You were told about the HLBAC development agreement vote, but not that the HLBAC had been instructed that Girdwood's concerns were irrelevant and that their only considerations should be whether the development agreement benefited the Muni and HLB. That meant the dozens of Girdwood residents who had written in and/or taken hours out of the middle of their day were all wasting their time cumulatively, hundreds of hours just at that one meeting. Hopefully, even this very abridged version of the process irregularities that have plagued the Holtan Hills project from the beginning shines a light on the underlying systemic issues of the development agreement. Issues that are critical not only for this specific project, but also for every HLB disposal of Girdwood land in the future. The full story of the development agreement between HLB and CY Investments includes rules and procedures that have been manipulated or outright ignored. Girdwood's representatives being treated with disdain and threatened with lawsuits, disregard for Girdwood's interests and concerns, and financial irregularities that abound in a process that has been shrouded in secrecy and manipulations of the public process from the beginning. We've even been dismissed as wealthy whiners, a serious misrepresentation of our struggling resort employees, teachers, medical personnel, and firefighters earning $12.50 an hour and losing the ability to afford living in the town they're helping to feed, educate, and protect. Offering condos and homes to both millionaires and multimillionaires is absolutely not the same as actually offering a range of housing. We understand that a fair amount of negotiations are going on in the background, trying to salvage this agreement despite the lack of input from Girdwood. I hope you understand if we view it as slapping a Band-Aid on a broken leg, not solving the problem, even more critically, not addressing the issues that created the break in the first place. In the end, the results speak for themselves. We all know that no community in Anchorage and no town in Alaska should be excluded the way Girdwood has been from decisions that are fundamental to their future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Wait, Madam Chair, I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Constant, for the members of GBOS,
The previous speaker.
go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. You just alleged a number of improprieties, financial dealings, etc. I would welcome you to provide evidence of those claims before Tuesday for us.
She will be providing you with that information.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Thank you.
Mr. Daniels?
Thanks. First, I'd like to thanks for the opportunity to talk. And one of the reasons that I was asked to come back and serve in this capacity, and I had no idea what I was getting into back in June and July, is that I was the chair of the Girdwood Board of Supervisors during the time when the trooper station closed, and I helped to shepherd in the Whittier Police Department serving the community in Girdwood. And so there was some hope that I might be able to provide a service here with helping to bring the community together so that they had a focused view on this project. We were asked to come together by the Board of Supervisors at the behest of the Heritage Land Bank and the developer. We were told that if we formed a committee and could put forward what the community's needs were, that would be well received. And so we began meeting in early July, and we met regularly all the way into the fall. I think it was a wonderful community process, and that's what I'm all about. And it was inclusive. We had differing points of view. We sat together in the community room in Girdwood. And although there wasn't a clear consensus, there was a list of things that many of which Mike has touched on, which we asked for the community, okay? And we met then two times with Connie Yoshimura and Mr. Trombley to try and put those issues forward, those asks. And we were not able to get a lot of traction there. I will say that one of the things that is pleasing to me is to see in this S version, one of the primary things that we had asked for was the creation of a land trust and the deeding of property to the third party for the hopes of developing workforce community housing in the area. And to see that in here is certainly a step in the right direction. And I would like to thank both Mr. Trombley and the folks at the Heritage Land Bank for putting that together. But it does fall way short of what we need in Girdwood for housing. And this is how far back I go. I was one of the original facilitators when the Girdwood Area Plan was developed in 1995. We met in the Day Lodge. It was a great process. Larry Daniels and I helped the Agnew Beck folks put that together. One of the things people have talked about how things have changed in some ways and not in others. One of the things I am privy to that I would like to share, I pulled the stats today for sales in the last year in Girdwood for condos and homes in the Girdwood, just Girdwood, not Bird Creek, Indian, or any of those other communities. So for a 12-month calendar and MLS sales in Girdwood, there have been 27 single-family homes that have sold in Girdwood in the last 12 months. Of those, all the median sales price for those homes were $708,000. That's the median price, okay? And the average days on market were 13. For condos, there have only been 11 sales in the last 12 months. The average days on market is 3. The average sales price is $526,000. So I'm here to tell you right now, folks, that we really do have a crisis in Girdwood. I did property management in Girdwood for over 20 years of long-term rentals. I used to manage 70 doors in Girdwood. I saw that start to drop about 10, 12 years ago. And what folks were doing was taking their old rental properties and turning them into VRBOs. So there aren't places for all those young people who want to come and live in Girdwood and start families. And what I can tell you, and I think this is where we all really connect, whether we agree or we don't agree, is that what makes that community what it is the involvement of the local community members. We have a vibrant community that has lots of very wonderful nonprofits, and those are driven, such as these volunteers right here, Jen and Mike on the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, by the fact that we have such a vibrant community where people can't afford to live in. So what I've heard tonight is a lot of really good questions, and I want to thank the Assembly folks who have asked questions. And I would encourage you to not simply approve the project. There need to be some real changes here in order for it to be meaningful for Girdwood. And we are articulate, we are well thought out, and folks are not necessarily, I agree with Mike, it's not a case where there are some folks who are going to say, we don't want any development in Girdwood. That is not realistic. We need more homes. But I am here to tell you, as a licensed real estate broker with as much experience as anyone on the planet, that these homes will be anything but affordable. And if we're talking about a $500,000 sales price, this year alone, appreciation has been 13% for homes and condos. So if you put the average at $500,000 for a condo, and the median is there, right? The median price is there right now. 2 or 3 years from now, when these things get built, it's going to be north of that. And it's not going to be the local folks who buy these homes. It's not going to be the school teachers or the Whittier Police Department members who'd like to buy into Girdwood. It's going to be folks who want to have ski homes and who have very deep pockets. I think that the process that we went through is impressive, and I'm really hopeful. What I would love to see you guys do is to encourage Heritage Land Bank to meet with the community again, whether it be the Board of Supervisors or the Holtan Hills Advisories Committee, to see if we can't massage this some more to make it more palatable for the community. As it is right now, it's really not workable, you guys. I mean, yeah, I think the HLB Advisory Commission is trying really hard, but it was clear to me when they were listening about the project, a lot of them don't even know where the waterline trail is that we're talking about. It's on the way up to the school where Holtan Hills begins. And the impact on places like Hightower Road is going to be incredible. I am here to tell you, it is going to be incredible. We don't oppose development. We want thoughtful development that serves the community and that ensures that, you know, I've got buyers right now who have good money in the bank, ready to buy something in Girdwood, and they're priced out, and they were ready to buy a home, you know, that was $500,000 to $700,000, and their ship set sail. And folks, I don't think it's going to go back the other way. The only thing that will ever stop Girdwood is if the resort were to shut down, and that's not going to happen. So I just really, I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have. I always speak from the heart. I'm not a numbers kind of guy, but I do really believe that in its current form, you yourself have had a lot of questions here tonight, that it would be ill-advised of you just to approve the project as it stands right now. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak, Ms. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. And I have 2 members in the queue. First is Ms. Quinn Davidson and then Mr. Constant. And I believe Mr. Trombley has a hard stop at 5:15 or so.
I can stick around for 5 more.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yeah, thanks to you guys for being here. And particularly Mike, you've been sort of through this process for a while now, coming to us. And I feel like always presenting really trying to take the emotion out of it and try to focus on the solution. And I think that's really important because we're getting a lot of emotional emails that are somewhat offensive and making a lot of claims that feel, you better do this or X. Anyway, I appreciate that you're not doing that. And I think it's really important if we want to be successful together to be respectful to each other. So I've been really paying attention to the concerns, and I have been undecided on this project, so I don't come into it with an agenda or anything. But I do feel like a lot of the community concerns I'm hearing are, we want this project to solve the problem of affordable housing in Girdwood. And it feels like there's this mismatch. It's like this single project has become this vision for, this is either solving the problem or not. And I don't know that it can. I mean, I think what the community is maybe expressing they want and need, and is totally legitimate, which is housing for people. This developer or this project can't probably pencil out what the community wants, right? I mean, that's the problem, is that it's not affordable in Girdwood. So I guess, sorry for the length, but my question is, like, how do we move forward? Because if that's the standard we're using every time, the assembly is going to be asked to vote no on everything all the time. And is that what you want? Is you want there to be no development because it's not answering the problem, specifically responding to the problem?
So I'll have a go at answering this. In my earlier comment, I said there are actually 4 things we need. One of them is affordability in the broadest sense, but affordability, I would define it. I think, can I use first names in this? I think we're informal, aren't we? So I think Adam said earlier, nobody's defined what affordable is. Affordable is very simple. It's if you use the federal definition of affordable of 30% of your income is spent, or household income is spent on housing, or no more than 30%. And what we're looking for is a housing mix across the community that meets the that 30% value for the distribution of incomes in that community. And what we're seeing now is housing costs that meet the 30% requirement for people who are purchasing second homes. So that is obviously probably upper decile of everyone in the state or in Anchorage. So there's a mismatch between the community's economic situation and the actual market of the demand for housing. But that was only one of 3. The other things we need are a mixture of housing. We need community housing, which means mid-income housing as well, even upper mid-income housing.
But Mike, can I just, so I feel like what you just said was the same thing I said, which is,
not quite.
You all are asking, you're saying, oh, we're not meeting it. This project doesn't meet the needs for affordable housing in Girdwood,
well, not specifically affordable. Sorry, I had to interrupt.
Yeah, well, I already interrupted you, so it's okay. We're just going back. It's so awkward here. It's like you just want to have a conversation. But how do we solve this big problem in this development? And are there other ways to solve the problem? And does the trust or the authority or whatever we're calling it, that feels like a big piece of the solution, rather than try to wedge this project into this solution that isn't even attainable yet. And anyway.
My personal opinion is this project will not solve all of our problems. And I think, as I said at the beginning of my short comment, the statement, that there's a lot of emotion in this because we as a community are seeing our community basically be destroyed by these sorts of pressures, housing pressures. So that's what's driving the emotion. And, as to misquote Sam, I am a numbers guy. I'm not speaking from the heart.
Sam is too. He gave us stats.
But
they were good.
Yeah, that's right. Sam came with the stats. So I think there are absolutely parts of this problem that can be addressed by this development. And one of those is a focus on housing that's occupied, not housing that's vacant. And that could absolutely be done within this framework without making any, without changing the profitability for the private developer. And there's a number of other things that could be as well. I don't have time to sort of go into the tedious details, but I would be happy to afterwards. I think there was a second point as well, which I've just forgotten.
No, that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we can address part of it, but obviously not everything. We are not going to produce, partly because of the actual location of this. This is not the least expensive place to build, even within Girdwood. So we are unlikely to be able to build very low-cost housing for very low incomes in that location. But we can address, low, mid, and probably even upper mid housing. So.
Thanks, Mike. Go ahead, Sam. And it's after 5, so yeah, first names.
And we get to sing happy birthday at the end.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to speak briefly to what you were saying. And we don't expect this to be a magic bullet. That's not going to happen. But I do think that working together, life is full of compromises. All we can do is the very best any of us can do. And I think that what the HLB and what Adam has suggested about a housing authority or a trust and deeding that property over to this third party entity, that all that has to be worked out. But that is a step in the right direction, and it sets the precedent of the public lands that are disposed of that belong to the municipality having some component of affordable housing. And that is a really big deal. There are other things that can be done. The concern that I have with a PUD that's going to have a homeowners association, let's say that we're not going to have any nightly rentals. Well, that can be changed with a vote. That can be changed by a vote of the membership of the homeowners association to change the rules so that they can entertain long-term rentals.
I don't know that that's true, but I don't know if Dean or Adam would want to weigh in. But if we put that in as a requirement of any development, I don't think then they could just change it.
If that can
Yeah.
be made a solid
Yeah.
requirement, then that's a big deal, because right now we have
Right.
just a lot of nightly rentals.
Yeah.
So I do think that some of the things that are being proposed, I think I think that we as a community can work together with HLB to come up with enough of the critical asks that would get approved by the land bank and by the assembly to make this a viable project for Girdwood. And there aren't many developers around that have the capability to do this like CY Investments does. And I have said that from the very beginning. Connie is a very capable developer. And I think part of her vision about what Adam talked about mixed density and stuff, that's awesome. That's exactly part of what we need.
And Adam, you want to add something, and then I'll go to Jennifer.
Sure. Just before I have to walk out of here, I just want to mention, I forgot to mention this during the presentation, is that the homeowners association, the rules regarding the homeowner association has to be approved by the municipality. So it's not as though Connie goes out, forms a homeowner association, creates her own rules. That has to be approved by HLB.
Thanks, Adam. Jennifer, did you want to weigh in? Through Lene.
Just the bottom? Okay. This piece of property is the largest and best developable land reaming in Girdwood. Is that it's currently our best chance at doing something about a housing situation that's really a crisis. So yeah, basically, we don't have many shots. Land is finite. We really need to get it right. We need to address the needs of the community before we add to the second homes.
Suzanne, Chair Suzanne, could I take the opportunity to answer some of the questions that came up earlier from Assembly members?
Yes, but
I have a
before we
question.
do that, because I know some members have to go.
Right.
But the recording can continue, I think, too. Go ahead, Chris, and then Meg, and then we'll go back to you, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Sam, Mr. Dennis, I don't think we've met. You, I think, in your discussion there, did it again, talked about how the use of Hightower Road is going to be overwhelming for the neighborhood, and that as a problem with this development, meaning it strikes against supporting it. Imagine a scenario where you have 250 apartments being built somewhere up in that same tract of land, or 300, 400, whatever it is that meets the need of the community that people are asking for. Doesn't that create the same or more impacts on Hightower Road, right? And so I can't tell which way that argument cuts.
Madam Chair, Mr. Constant, yeah, it'll have a huge impact. And I agree with you. There is another access point that they're going to be using through Crow Creek Road as well. But, right now, if you drive up Hightower Road, we have the new clinic that's just gone in. We have another condo development that has gone in. Yeah, Girdwood has change coming. And we don't mind as a community, I don't believe, and I'm speaking in the royal we, having to pay our fair share for those improvements. But yeah, it is going to make things more complicated if that's what you're asking. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we certainly need to make sure that it can be done in such a way that when the kids are trying to cross from Little Bears, from the Forest Fair Park over to the Merc to get a popsicle in the summertime, they don't get run over by a Mack truck. That's my concern.
Right. I totally understand, but that happens whether you have a development that's established in this way, which is a planned unit development, or you do a major apartment development that supports workers at 30% of the median income, right, per unit, or whatever that magic number is, right? Those impacts are there, right?
Yes, I completely agree with you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Meg?
Thanks, Suzanne. So just this S version will be before us Tuesday night. And one of the unresolved questions, I think, is in section C, one multifamily lot. I don't think that's adequate. If an alternative could be suggested, I'm going to be bringing a number of amendments or an S1 to this to clarify some language based on the discussion, because I don't know what will happen Tuesday night, if this will move forward or not. So if there is a number of acres, or there is some specific designation of a plat number, or I don't know, it's platted yet, but
Clarify.
whatever the thing might be, would be really helpful to have.
This is Sam again. I wanted to make sure there are 3 multifamily lots in phase 1 that are all large. That's the number. There are 3 of them that will hold at least an 8-plex. Okay. So that's what we're working with, the way it's platted right now.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Sam. Thanks.
There's actually through the chair, there's actually 5 multi-unit in phase 1. It's 3 8-plexes and 2 4-plexes proposed.
32 units.
32 units.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe the current plan is.
And so we'll go to
If I
Jennifer.
might, a quick follow-up.
Hold on a sec, Chris. Jennifer is going to speak through Lene.
Yeah, Jennifer wanted to respond to the discussion about the Hightower Road usage. The question here is one of being able to maintain services. Our infrastructure is already strained, and our service agencies and businesses are all struggling to find employees, largely because of the lack of housing. Providing housing for our residents is a key part of being able to handle the increase in demand at our businesses, as well as the increased strain on infrastructure.
Thank you. And I know folks are leaving here, but go ahead, Mike, if you want to address some of those questions.
Yeah, I would. The first thing I just want to speak to Meg very quickly before she leaves. The discussion about housing authority, I agree. It's as in my research, there are no housing authorities at the municipal or community level. There are only regional housing authorities. There are some other ideas and other things, and some of those should be in front of you very soon. And I'd like to catch up and talk to you about that before next Tuesday. The other, not actually a homeowner association. The other things I want to touch on, the questions that have come earlier, is Chris touched on this sort of conflict he's seen in a lot of the comments between the community's need for more housing and the community's concern about infrastructure. You're not actually seeing that at all from any statements from GBOS. You're not seeing that. We're much more we're pretty consistent in the way we describe it. But I think the comment that came earlier from Jennifer is really the one about the areas where we're struggling in infrastructure is staffing infrastructure. So the idea that if we build a lot more housing, that will solve the problem is not true. It will not provide a stable employee base unless we deal with these other issues as well. So I think there is a way in which there is a problem with providing infrastructure if more housing is put in first, but that's if the housing doesn't address the underlying problems we're having with infrastructure. There were
Mike, I
yeah,
kind of
sure.
jumped on there real quick since
Yeah,
you were
sure.
addressing me. This gets back to Austin's point that you can't literally expect the housing developer to solve your sidewalk and employment infrastructure problems. That's Goliath.
We cannot.
That's Goliath.
We're not expecting them to solve the sidewalk problems. I would say most of those are already addressed, although there is a need for more sort of some better better roads. But no, what I'm saying is the idea that adding more housing itself without any other structural changes or without structural changes to this particular project will provide effectively a stable employment situation is of course nonsensical. But by adding more housing, we are increasing the demand on infrastructure. So it's a little bit more subtle in those two.
And Mike, Randy has a
And
question.
Mike, one last thing.
Wait, hold on, Chris.
I'll
Randy
cut
has
up
a
after one
question.
last reply.
Go ahead, Randy.
Thanks, fellow friends. So, Mike, would GBOS or has anyone entertained the idea of just going to HLB and making a request for an RFP, another RFP to address these specific needs? Say, HLB set aside 100 acres for affordable workforce housing, put the stipulations that Girdwood wants in it, and see what developer bites on it and what requirements will take.
That's a reasonable request. As long as this development also achieves the sort of minimum requirements it has to. We can't expect this to do everything. We can expect this to do some things. And at the moment, in the way it's structured, it does not address the key issues even for a development of this type. There were just a couple of other quick things I wanted to talk about. Hopefully they can.
Mike, before you do, I have to run to another meeting, but I'm going to make a little radical suggestion. If the issue is that people can't afford housing because housing is expensive, I think the workers of Girdwood should organize and unionize and demand to get paid a living wage.
There's kind of an escalation war even at the resort, I think pays a minimum of $18 or $20 now for entry level jobs. So pay has jumped up significantly. It's still nowhere close to housing costs. So I don't know that. Again, the conflict is really between sort of upper decile incomes elsewhere and the community.
Okay, go ahead, Mike. And if you want to wrap up.
Just a couple of quick things I just want to point out from comments earlier. To Austin. I think Austin was asking questions about whether short-term rental should only apply to single-family homes. I think with the underlying assumption that the requirement is only around short-term rentals. The problem we have is that the housing being developed will not be for occupancy, for primary occupancy. Short-term rentals are one way in which you don't get primary occupancy, but second home and vacation homes are the other way you don't get primary occupancy. So we actually need housing which people live in. And this development has nothing around it which either promotes, encourages, incentivizes, or any other method to actually have primary residences. So the short-term rental argument is part of it, but it's only part of that. And restrictions on short-term rental do not solve the problem by itself. Austin also asked a question about whether senior housing was in the RFP. The RFP actually covered a number of issues around senior housing and workforce housing and other things. I don't believe I do not recall whether the proposal did or did not. There isn't an unredacted copy of the proposal that I've seen, and the copy which was on the HLB site is no longer accessible. Meg also asked a question about whether other things such as tax incentives or tax abatements could be used in Girdwood. Yes, in principle, yes. There was a state law which stopped us from using them to their maximum effect, and I did testify about a year or two ago about that when changes were made to Anchorage Code. The main issue is any local area taxes, Girdwood service area taxes, could not be abated or could not be exempted. There was a state law last year, HB 411, which actually changed that and made a number of other changes to the tax incentive statutes, which give us a lot more flexibility and do now allow us to use that in Girdwood. And we'd very much like to explore that. And I think the final comment that, no, actually that's it. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone want to add anything, or it looks like Jennifer has some comments?
Oh, good. President Kay's got some comments.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Okay. To address Mr. Constant and Randy, our restaurants and businesses are competing with Anchorage businesses. So here's the ceiling on how much more expensive they can get to cover wages, not to mention how high wages would have to be to cover current real estate prices. And we're not asking for the developer to solve our housing issues in one fell swoop. We're asking that public land be used for the public good.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sam, did you have anything final you wanted to add? Thank you. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and I just want to thank you all for being here way past our scheduled time, and to our, actually, you two are the last representatives of the administration, I think, here. Thank you, Ryan and Emma, and Mike and Jennifer. Sam, thank you also for being here, and Lene and all the others too who came in from Girdwood, and the members. So as noted, this item is on the agenda for Tuesday. It's item 14E, and it's a public hearing item. And I expect and hope the conversation will continue. Thanks, everybody, and appreciate the administration bringing an S version forward. Have a great weekend. We are adjourned.